the actual Constitution, for the purposes of deciding representative government, judged every African American slave as worth 3/5 of a white American. This injustice was a profound blemish on the history and tradition of America, one of many. Thomas Jefferson, a Virginia slave owner who wrestled with this question all of his life, felt that a just God would not allow slavery to continue. And he said that if the American tradition of slavery wasn't ended, that God would judge this country. Just 80 years later, Abraham Lincoln, in his second inaugural address, suggested that that was the reason why the Civil War had arisen, as a condition of indemnity, to use the principal term, a payment in blood, a payment in sacrifice for the injustice of slavery. The Civil War might have arisen for a number of reasons, out of the struggle over states' rights and economic issues, but it was ultimately spiritually about one thing: to separate good and evil and purify America from the sin of slavery. Like Israel of old that was divided, like Abraham's offering that had to be separated, America too became divided over this issue as a condition to purify this country. Now, let's talk about the significance of democracy. But before I do, I need to introduce to you the concept of how an ideal society is actually the reflection of an ideal person who is in a relationship with God. In an ideal person, cells combine to form tissues, which harmonize to form muscles or bones or nerves or organs. And these function as systems to make a harmonized body. Now, there are three vital systems: heart and circulatory, stomach and digestive, and lungs and respiratory. These are like important functions in society, like executive and legislative and judiciary. But all of these different systems work together and in harmony because they're guided by the brain and connected through the central nervous system. Now, the nerves go everywhere in the body so that our entire body is connected, which is why if you have a paper cut, your whole body feels it. If you have a splinter or a hangnail or a toothache, your whole body suffers over the suffering of any one part. Likewise, a healthy body has good economy: production, distribution, and consumption. And if any one of those are out of balance, the body becomes sick. Likewise, an ideal society should function in much the same way. Cells are like people. People come together in families. Families are part of different organizations in society, whether they are economic or social or religious or entertainment, whatever. Then these function together, and there are certain vital functions that keep the society together, like executive, judiciary, and legislative. But ultimately, what should make an ideal society work well and function properly is the fact that the nervous system is connected to every part of the body, meaning every single individual has, in maturity, a connection to the purpose and plan of God. The brain, or God, is connected to everything through that central nervous system. So we would feel the suffering of our brothers and sisters. We would be connected with everyone. And the economy would be in balance in the way that our physical body is in balance. Based on this, let's consider the significance of democracy and the separation of powers. The concept of the separation of powers into three branches of government was advocated first by Montesquieu, a leading Enlightenment thinker. From the beginning, the separation of powers was to be characteristic of the political structure of an ideal society, which God has been working to realize. It sought to prevent the concentration of political power in the hands of a single individual or institution, as was the case with political absolutism. So with the establishment of constitutional democracy, the framework for a harmonized and ideal political system was set up. The problem is, in the same way as individuals are disconnected from God, in a human society composed of such individuals, we are like a disconnected body. So because of the fall, today's democracies cannot fully display their original qualities nor function at their full potential. Why? Because currently the three branches of government function like internal organs which cannot sense or respond to the commands of the brain. They lack order, they lack harmony, and they suffer conflicts among themselves. We find society falling apart. We see cancer as one part of society turns on itself or on others. We see all kinds of inequalities and injustice because the society is out of sync with its natural purpose and relationship with God. The three branches of government in the ideal world will interact in harmonious and principled relationships when they follow God's guidance as conveyed through Christ, and when people are all connected to God and become people of God, then our systems and our social expressions will reflect that ideal. Next, the significance of the Industrial Revolution and the rise of Western Christian society. God's ideal of creation is not just about getting rid of sin. It can't be fulfilled merely by forming a world without sin. Also, God blessed human beings to have dominion over the universe. We are meant to live a joyful life. We are to seek for the hidden laws of nature and advance science and technology, harness the power of nature, and utilize it for the benefit of society, to create a pleasant living environment, not for a few, but for everyone. So that's the external purpose, external goal. Now, the Industrial Revolution had this purpose. We can understand that the Industrial Revolution, which began in England, arose out of God's providence to restore a living environment that was suitable for the ideal world. Industrial Revolution served an internal purpose as well. It opened up vast territory for the propagation of the gospel. Accordingly, this Industrial Revolution in England contributed to both the internal and external aspects of the providence of restoration. Let's look at that a little more closely and consider the rise of the great powers. Following the Industrial Revolution, spurred by the rapid progress of science, industrialization created economies that were characterized by overproduction. The great powers of Europe felt an urgent need to pioneer new lands, both as markets for their products and as sources of raw materials for their factories. These countries grew strong as they competed with each other for colonies. Now, tragically, these colonial and imperialist nations went to the world in the name of Christianity with the gospel. But because much of what happened was exploitation, much of what happened was economic and political, and because rather than respecting the native cultures and lifting them up and spreading the blessing that God had given to the Christian world, it became instead using and abusing. As a result, China closed its doors to Western civilization. Japan closed its doors to Western civilization. And in the colonies, in Africa and South America and other parts of the world where there had been much exploitation, communism arose out of resentment, out of the conviction that capitalism was a tool of the white man's oppression. Now, it was British historian Toynbee who said that communism is a bill of accusation and an indictment against the failures of Christianity. In other words, Jesus had said, when he returns, he'll separate sheep and goats based on how we've loved and served our brother. The promise of a good world and the responsibility of Christianity to pass the blessing to the rest of the world fell short. As a result, communism arose saying, don't look to heaven, don't look to God. Religion is just a tool of oppression. Religion is just a corrupt system to oppress the people and keep them from rising up and claiming what's rightfully theirs. This has unfortunately been the legacy of the last 400 years as well. And you'll see that it rose, it led to the great world wars of the 20th century, which we'll talk about in our next presentation. So, these two factors, the Cain and Abel trends in ideology and the economic development that followed the progress of science, caused the later political division of the world into two blocks, the democratic world and the communist world. These imperialist nations over the last 400 years arose, and ultimately World War I was initiated not only by the political events in Austria and Serbia, etc., but the struggle for colonial empires and markets and such things. Then the Second World War, which arose out of the ashes of the first, ultimately led to the division of the world in the 20th century into these two camps, the democratic and the communist, which we're going to discuss in more detail. Finally, let's consider the religious reforms and how they led to impact in politics and economy and industry. As we look at this final 400 years, the Cain-type movement, which began with the revival of Hellenism, overthrew the medieval world and gave birth to the humanism of the Renaissance. As this movement developed further, moving in a more worldly direction, it gave birth to the Enlightenment, which can be regarded as a second Renaissance in the current of ideology, as thought became more humanistic, more man-centered, more philosophical, more external. The Enlightenment thought further matured in the false direction, giving birth to historical and dialectical materialism, which is the core of communist ideology. And this can be regarded as the third Renaissance in this movement. Now, since the satanic side mimics in advance the providence of God, we can expect that God's providence will also unfold in three stages, in each of the spheres of religion, politics, and economy. Let's take a look. First of all, spiritually. In the sphere of religion, the first Reformation took place under Martin Luther's leadership following its elder brother or Cain-type movement, the Renaissance. A second Reformation, the Great Awakening and the Pietist movements and the Methodist movements, was launched after the second Renaissance, the Enlightenment, by the spiritual movements that we've mentioned. Now, from our examination of the progress of history, it's evident that a third Reformation not only will, but must occur following the third Renaissance to bring about the ideal world. It's not enough for Western society to have defeated communism. We can still see crises and struggles and moral dilemmas and the decline of the family. We need a spiritual revolution. Now, let's see how it impacted politics. In the political sphere, we can surmise that reform is also taking place in three stages. We can see that the Renaissance and Reformation together cooperated to break down medieval society. Medieval feudal society collapsed under the weight of the Renaissance and Reformation. Likewise, democracy was formed out of Enlightenment ideals and the Christian spirit. So absolute monarchy was destroyed by the forces unleashed by the Enlightenment, the Second Renaissance, and the Christian spirit of the Second Reformation. Together they formed the foundation of modern Abel-type democracy, which broke down absolute monarchy. Finally, the communist world arose as the Cain-type democracy, followed by the political revolutions that came about through the communist movement. However, what next has to happen is that through the coming of this ultimate spiritual renewal and third religious reformation, the democratic world on God's side must triumph in the ideological war, bring the communist world to its knees, and together unite and realize the kingdom of heaven on earth under God. And finally, the economic sphere. The economic changes which follow these movements, the religious and political reforms, have also been progressing through three levels of industrial revolution. The first originated in England, based on the steam engine and coal power, etc. The second, a century later, the second industrial revolution took place in many advanced nations based on the development and harnessing of electricity and the development of the internal combustion gasoline engine. Now, the third industrial revolution that is flowering in our time is created by safely tapping the natural powers of nature, the power of the atom, the power of the sun, thermal power, etc. These will construct a pleasant living environment for the ideal world. So we can see that in the centuries of preparation prior to the Second Advent, the three stages of revolution in religion, politics, and industry for the construction of the ideal world are required by the principle to develop through three stages. In this way, we can see how the world has been prepared internally and externally to realize God's ideal. I deeply appreciate your time and attention. This was a lot of philosophy and ideology and perspectives and history, but I hope that through it you could see that the hand of God is working in the providence of restoration, that we are living in a time that has been shaped by these earlier periods, and we stand on the threshold of the realization of God's kingdom. In our final presentations, we will address and answer the question, how God is working right now. Thank you very much.